recording. And I think we're recording. Okay, great. So I think, great, perfect. Okay, so just a quick reminder, as I mentioned, well, assessments due in a couple of weeks, so we don't really have to worry about that for now. Um, what we do want to check is, again, great job for everyone who shared in our week 5 activity there. So I think most of you did. And I think a lot of you also shared your ideas with regards to, a possible look that we're going for, right? So I'm trying to stay away from cartoony looks too much, or toony looks, primarily because, well, there are, well, especially with 2D type of, rendering, we might not be able to cover skills that might help you in other forms of rendering. So if we focus too much on, you know, toony shaders, it might prevent you from learning other things as well. Okay, so I'm just looking for something that will help you for in other situations. Okay, so with that said, a quick reminder with regards to your assessment, right? So with regards to assessment, it's going to be primarily research and exploration. Now, I'm not, well, a lot of it is will be research and exploration in the context of look development. So we will cover things like render passes, but I'm not enforcing it on you guys to use that particular method because you can achieve different types of looks using different methods, right? So you don't necessarily need to use compositing, don't necessarily need to use passes. You can just do everything using shading. But it might be a good idea to just practice a little bit of both because there will be situations where you might need, you know, the technique of rendering it in passes. Okay, but it's no way, something that I'll enforce. Okay, so again, quick reminder, we're going to create a 10-second sequence. And as I mentioned, we specified a backstory there. So it's going to be a warm, inviting look. And then it's going to be outdoors, daytime. I won't even specify the time of day, but it's basically a small, vibrant town. Okay. Again, I already gave you the scene. So if you don't have it, just make sure to have a look at our announcements, right? Because the link for those scenes and also the scope sheet will be there. So hopefully that's clear. Now, what I do want to discuss though is the direction that I want you guys to use. Now, the direction isn't very specific, but I'm just treating it as guidelines for you when you're developing your look. Okay, so there's going to be a few things that I need to see in your render. Okay, so first up, okay, so as I mentioned, and let me just, I guess, open this. So the reason why we're doing this is so you guys will understand how to break down a particular look or a particular style to component pieces. Okay, so for example, similar to this one, notice again, I'm not sure, I haven't seen this particular movie, but again, it has its own unique style, right? And again, notice that with the unique style there, see, there's no specularity on the eyes. You have reduced depth of field blurring in the background. You even have, it might not be clear here, but see, you have subtle outlines there, a brownish one. And then you even have, additional lines and even paint lines there. So see, notice that you have paint lines. And then you even have, um, very stylized look for the shading, right? So again, we're trying to we're trying to break down a particular look and we're treating it as things that we need to solve, right? We need to find solutions for. So for assessment 2, these are the things that I need to see from your look. So number 1, okay, so I think this is all recorded, right? So number 1, everyone, okay, we're going with a nice soft gradient look. Okay, so I got the feedback and some recommendations from you. I'm using some of it, but I'm also combining it with what I feel that you guys might learn from, right? So number 1, I want it to be in a soft gradient 3D look, but again, it's not 2D, right? So notice that these particular examples here, they're not 2D toon renders. So it's not like it's Family Guy or something, or maybe other stylized 2D renders that you see. It's still 3D, but they have a nice soft look. I'm not going to specify, I'm not saying at all that you need to follow this look or you need to follow that look. I'm just saying that as your first guideline, I want it to have that soft gradient look. So when I say gradient look, see, notice that, see, it's not pure brown. Notice, or pure, so the colors are not pure. So notice that it gradiates, um, particularly from the edges or from the corners here towards the middle. So again, see, it's gradiating, right? So see, notice that it's not a pure color. So you have that nice gradiated look. It's quite bright. It's quite soft as well. So similar to this one. Again, this is not 2D, but notice that you do have that nice gradient look all throughout. Okay, so that's number one. Okay. Now, so is that clear? So it's actually number two here. So, but is the second requirement clear for everyone here? So just checking. So just checking with everyone here if that's clear. So we were going with a soft look, right? Similar, I guess, to some of the stuff that I showed here. So we're not going with a more contrasty look or more, still kids content, but see, it does that nice soft look. Notice that there's really not a lot of specular, but I like the gradation you see there. So see, notice that you have gradation there coming from, it's gradiating from a lighter area to a darker area there. So it's consistent all throughout. Okay, so if you have any questions, just, type it in or just use your microphone, right? So that's the first thing. Number two, I do want to have that nice, appealing, consistent backlighting. Okay, so even scenes that are not necessarily, backlit. So for example, this one, there's really no actual lights in the back. Well, there's a little bit there, but see, it consistently has that nice soft rim lighting that you see there. Okay, so similar to this one as well, although this is not very obvious, but it has some nice soft lighting there. It's not, again, subtle. It does, but it has to be clear. Okay, so we need that nice soft lighting there. It might mean that you need to add lights, or it might mean that you need to do it as a shader effect. Okay, but I need to see that nice soft lighting because again, we're coming up with a stylized look, right? It's not realistic 3D. It's not photorealistic 3D. We're going with a more stylized, non-photoreal rendering. Okay, so I want that nice, I guess, high rim lighting, consistent on all, I guess, all your objects there. Okay, so is that clear for everyone? That's the first and second. Make sense? Again, we're going with a nice stylized look, soft gradient look in 3D, suitable for a lot of those kids' content. This is a good example, which are, again, I'm not saying at all that you follow that particular style. I'm just saying that those are our base requirements, right? So no questions for this first two because we have a few more. Okay. Now the thing is, I shared this particular direction, right? So if you have a look at your week 6 and week 5 pages and themes, notice that you have look development directions there. It's a PDF. You should access this. If you're not able to access this, just let me know and I'll share a link. But see, this is our direction there. Similar to week 6. So you still have look development directions and then you have all of that. Okay, so just take note. Okay, so those are the first two things. Next couple of things that I need to see from your stylized look. Next one is, or next couple of things there, sorry. There you go. Okay, so I got this from one of the suggestions as well. So I want the hand painted texture or the hand painted style, okay, on your textures, I guess. So notice that, see, this is not realistic at all. Well, there's a little bit of realism there, but obviously it looks like a shirt, but it has a very nice stylized look. So see, it's not evenly painted, so it's almost like it's hand painted. Notice that there's even scratches there. Again, I'm not going to specify what type of hand painted look it is because that can mean a lot of things, right? Meaning hand painted might mean it's pastels or it's watercolor that you're using a brush, or it might be you're using a pen, or it might be oil, stuff like that. But I'm not going to specify. I just want that hand painted look. Okay, so again, when you're dealing with your textures, I want that hand painted look there. Okay, Now, it doesn't mean that you necessarily need to do manual texturing for everything. You can still get that look by just playing around, experimenting, and we'll talk about experimentation later on. Okay, so again, you can still use textures that you downloaded, but again, we want to be able to see that nice. See that? I like that. See, notice that. Again, this is 2D. I'm not saying that you make that two-dimensional, but see, notice that it's uneven. It's very personal with regards to how it's textured. So we want that particular, texturing, right? And another thing, I also want those random, or not really random, but strategically placed squiggly lines. So that adds a lot of characters. You can see that, right? So see this one's, and then you can actually see this one. It's like you're drawing, right? Notice that you have some squiggly lines there. And then notice that you even have some of those, some lines. So random lines, okay? Strokes or lines across different parts of your, so see, I like this. See, so notice that you have that. So you have some, it's not random, it's strategically placed, but see, you just have those things, okay? So notice now, see, in terms of shading, you have those squiggly lines, okay? Even those, see, notice that you have those, okay? So are these two instructions clear for everyone in terms of the look? Again, I'm not going to specify what color. So few things there. I didn't specify what color it should be, right? So I'm going to give you a lot of freedom with regards to that. I'm not going to specify what type of hand-painted style it is. Is it watercolor? Is it this? Is it that? Or is it just, maybe hand-painted means it's Photoshop, but you can really see the stroke and stuff like that, right? But is this two things clear for everyone? Just checking. Any questions? Okay. Checking. Okay. So looks like some of you can't access the stuff from Teams. If you can't, let's see. It's no big deal. I'll just share. So you know what? Let me just share the PDF directly. So let's see. So let me just share the PDF directly. Copy link, and I'll share that here. Okay, there you go. Okay, and I'll also share it here. If you know what, it's there. Okay, so you can have a look at that. So just checking with everyone here, is that clear with regards to these two lines of instruction? So hand painted style textures and then pencil strokes. Okay, so strategically place squiggly lines and strokes. Again, we're just trying to make it more personalized and stuff like that. So relatively clear. Okay, so I'm assuming that if you don't answer, I'm assuming that it's clear and we can proceed to other things. Okay, so next thing. Okay, and then we'll have a look at this again. I do want, okay, contour lines, almost like it's similar to cell shading, or basically similar to classic cartoons or classic animations that you see. So I want those subtle contour lines. So it's but it's uneven. You don't want just straight contour lines, similar to so we don't want it as just wireframes. We want it as subtle um, contour lines. Okay, so if some of you saw, let's say, Spider-Verse, I think, and let's have a look at that. Maybe not particularly that, I guess, because they don't actually have that 2D effect, but let's see. But I do like, so see, this is a good breakdown in terms of what is actually in that particular movie. But what we're looking for, everyone, is, again, I don't want it like this. So it has to be subtle. It's clear, but I don't want it necessarily like Borderlands. If you guys are familiar, see, that's obvious. So if you have a look at that, see, so not like that. That's too harsh. We want something a bit softer. So perhaps something similar to that. See, so you guys can see, hopefully you guys can see that one, right? So there's still contour lines around the shape, around the silhouette of the character. See, but it's relatively subtle and it's uneven. Okay, so see that? Notice now there are a little bit of contour lines there. Okay, so is that clear? So subtle but clear, uneven drawing lines. Okay, so is this clear as well? Any questions before we continue? Okay, and lastly, there's one last thing. Okay, one last thing, because I do recognize that it's a big scene, right? So if you end up spending too much time texturing it, you won't be able to do the other activities or other processes for look dev. So what I want you guys to do is just concentrate on the immediate area where the character is. So maybe around this area where she's sitting, and maybe that area there. Okay, so that's the fully shaded area. Everything is lit. Okay, so everything is properly lit, etc. But with regards to the fully shaded area, it's only just that. Okay, the rest of it, you can. I want you to use some sort of grayscale. So it's almost like it's a magical scene where everything she goes or everything she touches become I guess achieves or captures color, but everything else is grayscale. So almost like those color grayscale things that you see. Okay, so again, she will be fully shaded and fully colored. Maybe the area around her will be fully shaded and fully colored, but everything else still needs to be lit. But you can go with a wireframe look. So basically, shade grayscale wireframe look similar to perhaps that one. Okay, so it's still wireframe, and then it's basically grayscaled. Okay, so still lit, but there's no shading or no color in it. Okay, so that's really the last piece of direction. But is that clear for everyone? What I mean by that? So again, the immediate area here is fully shaded, fully colored. So again, you can just concentrate. If you do need to spend time texturing, you can concentrate your texturing there. But everything else, including all of those elements there, they really just need a grayscale, but with wireframing as well. Okay, so is that making sense for everyone here? So just going over what you guys will be doing for your look dev in the second assessment. Okay, so number one, again, 3D look still, not 2D, not toony. It's going to be soft gradient 3D look, similar to what you see there. Okay, and then again, we need some consistent backlighting all the way through, and this is all shared, right? Next, everyone, is we want hand-painted textures. Now, what hand-painted means is going to be up to you at this stage. Strokes, so some squiggly lines and strokes, so to add a lot of personality into, I guess, our renders. Okay, and then lastly, subtle but clear. So we don't want that to be like ink or like like pen contours. We want it to be a bit more subtle, but it should be clear and it should be a little bit uneven. So see, notice that it's not even all throughout. Okay, so and lastly, I really just want you to concentrate on that main area there. Okay, everything else can be grayscale, but it has that wireframe look. So text grayscale wireframe look. In fact, let me just type that in, grayscale wireframe. Okay. Okay, so just by checking again if this direction is clear for everyone. Okay, so just checking, I guess, with, let's see who's here. So that's Astrid all the way to Benji, Daniel, Edric. We have Gemma, Hazel, Fraser. Okay, Jake, Joshua, etc. Okay, no questions. Is that clear with regards to what you need to do? Okay. Okay, so looks like you're everyone's fine. I think everything's recorded anyway, so hopefully that's clear, right? With regards to what you need. And again, we have to stick with the direction. And the reason why we're sticking to the direction is that's exactly what you end up doing when you're working, right? So when you're in the production, unless you're doing your own stuff, you will be following, I guess, the artistic direction or the production design for your project. Okay, so that means you need to be able to implement a particular look if you're a look development artist. Okay, so with that said, Okay, let's have a look at a few things that will help you in this process. Okay, so you guys are doing look dev. That means in this context, look dev actually covers everything visual, right? The modeling, all the way to texturing, all the way to effects. But for this context and for our class, it's just shading, lighting, and rendering. And we talked about that in the last assessment. Okay, so the difference in the second assessment compared to the first assessment is the the fact that we'll do a lot of experimentation or significant experimentation. Because in the last assessment, basically we went with a photoreal look, and then you guys came up with, I guess, a style board, and then a mood board, some lighting directions, and you also have a call out sheet. But we're going with a realistic look, a look that almost any 3D artist can accomplish, right? The difference between a look development artist and a regular 3D artist is a look development artist can achieve specialized looks. Okay, this is what we're trying to do in this particular assessment. Okay, so we'll do a lot of research and exploration, significant, and then we're also going to just explore and experiment with stuff. Okay, so again, this is our process. So once we've done some experiments, we can start planning and we can start shading and lighting it. Okay, this means you still need to do your things like color key, call out sheet, although I won't specify it here in class, but you still end up doing that, right? You're still shading, you're still lighting, stuff that we covered in the last assessment, you're still doing that, but there's going to be an added level of experimentation in this particular assessment. Okay, so with that said, let's just have a look at some useful tools that can help you. There's really a lot. Okay, so you can use, in look dev, it's common to maybe use something like Houdini, something like, shader development, shader writing, all of that. But for this, I'll just cover a few things that might help you specifically for this particular for assessment, and also even for future, look development projects. Okay, so let's have a look at some useful tools that will help you guys. Okay, number one is the ambient occlusion, because it's common. It's a really useful way of creating useful looks or stylized looks. Facing ratios, curvature, sheen and coat. We'll have a look at the toon shader, and we'll have a look at stylized texturing. So maybe let's have a look at those five or six things. Okay, that will help you immediately. Okay, so what I'll do is let's have a look at, let's say, ambient occlusion first, because that might be useful for you guys. So what I'll do is I'll just open Maya, right? I'll set a project, and I'm going to share this file with everyone. Okay, so let me just open the scene, week 6, and let me just remove all the stuff there. Okay. So let's just remove the camera. There you go. So it's really just some small objects there that I duplicated. And then it's a pumpkin. So let me just save the scene. And then let's optimize the scene size. So I'll get rid of the shaders. And then let's just assign a material for all of them. So let's say standard surface. And then there you go, right? And then I'll share this with everyone. Okay, so I'll save. Okay, save scene, and then there you go. Okay. Okay, so let me just... Okay. So let me just share that with everyone. It's stylized 3D. Okay, so I'll just plug it in here in the chat. Okay, sorry. Edric asked with regards to the floor. Color. The floor, just the immediate area. So let me just show you, I guess. So Edric was asking whether we need the floor to be shaded. So let me just save this scene, and then let's have a look at the other one. So as I mentioned, everyone, so the question is whether the floor needs to be shaded. As I mentioned, you just need to concentrate on the immediate area, but I do understand that the floor extends towards other areas as well. So what you're able to do, though, And I'll just, I guess, check what you are able to do. Let's see. Okay, so that's actually separate there. Okay, so essentially what you're able to do is you can even just select that and then go to, I guess, mesh and then separate that. Although that might be a bad idea. Um, let's see. And then I'll delete all history. Okay. Okay, so the reason why I did that is so now they're separate objects. Okay. So see, so now I can just concentrate on the area around our, that's right. So see, the stones are actually combined, which means you have to separate it. If you separate it, it just needs a lot of processing to be able to do that because there's a lot of objects there. And then now you have that area to yourself, right? The other issue though is, okay, the other issue, okay, is this area here. See, it's all part of the same, all part of the same area, I guess, or it's the same floor. But what you can do is you can just create, let's say, a simple, I don't know, cylinder, or maybe a simple sphere. Yes, you can select the faces, but I'm just showing you, you can select the faces, but you can also just, create a small platform. You just need to make it significantly smaller. There you go. Okay. So maybe, I don't know, something like that, right? So you can just concentrate on that area there. Okay. If you want to add a rug, totally fine as well. Or if you prefer deleting stuff, that's fine as well. So see, you can just select the faces, maybe these faces here. Although, yeah, the problem with that is you can extract that, but you still have the same issue where it's really big. It's not really conforming to just, it's not limiting itself to that circular area. But if you have something like this, that might be easier because now you have a small area. See, so now I have a small area just directly. Don't really like using a sphere, but see, there you go. Okay, so that might be an option. Okay, and then we can bring everything that was hidden. Okay, so there you go. See, so now I have that area there. If I assign a different material, see, so now I have that. Okay, so making sense. So that's, I guess, if you just want to limit your shading to that area, see, at least it's circular rather than having it, as polygonal. So at least you have that area there, right? Now, I don't, light it as a scene. I don't want you to actually create I don't want this area to be lit and everything is unlit. Just light it the way you should light it. So it's still part of the scene, but we're just focusing our shading on that area there. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. Okay, so I think, where were we? I'm supposed to give you that scene that I was using. Okay, so let me just share it here and then drop it. And there you go. So it's a Maya file. So you can have a look at that if you want. Did I accidentally delete? Just looks like I accidentally deleted it. But that's fine. You can always just create a plane and make that bigger. But there you go, everyone. Okay, so you are able to just, get that. Okay. Okay, let's have a look at, as I mentioned, the first thing, right, that might be useful for everyone, and that's ambient occlusion. Okay, and almost any renderer will have this. So regardless if you're using RenderMan or something like Redshift, etc., you will have some sort of ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion is useful because it simulates global illumination, ambient lighting, without spending a lot of time rendering or processing how the lighting works. So let me just show you what I mean. Okay, so I have a ground plane there. Okay, and I have my objects there. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm going to assign a material to them. Okay, and I'm going to assign a new material. And then for this material, I'm going to use something that you guys are probably not familiar with. I'll use the AI flat surface. And basically the AI flat surface or AI flat just gives you a flat color. So you don't have to deal with things like shading, like specularity, all of that stuff. So I just want you to focus. You know what? So you won't get, let's just use AI flat for now, okay? It's basically a standard surface without everything else, right? So you don't have to deal with things like, specularity, transmission, all of that stuff. But let me show you. It's a simple shader. So see, AI flat. Basically, you just get a flat color. So if I just render this one out, so I'll just use Arnold, and then I'll just use render. And maybe I'll just render out using hardware. Hopefully it doesn't crash my system. So GPU. And then Arnold, maybe I'll just use 5. And then maybe I'll just render it out, render view. And then let's render it out. Okay. Okay. Let's see. So let's see if we have a camera. So we do have a camera there. It is rendering my camera shape. We don't have a light. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so what I'll do, guys, I'll just add a light. Okay, but anyway, even before a light, I guess I can just add that in. So Arnold, I'll just add a light. I'll just add a sky dome light. And let's see if that actually works. So let's check. Standard surface. So maybe I have, let me just check if I accidentally deleted stuff. So Arnold is standard surface. Okay. So we are using beauty. I'm using, let me just refresh the scene, everyone. And then we can have a look at all of those stuff because I did remove some of the stuff there. So we have a light. And let me just do a render. So we are using a standard surface. And let me just check my Arnold renderer. And let me just use CPU for now because it looks like my GPU is problematic. There you go. So see, so it actually works. So maybe I'll just use CPU. So again, the issue is sometimes the GPU doesn't work for certain shaders. So it looks like it doesn't work for my other shader. But see, guys, this one works, right? So let's have a look again. If I assign, remember, assign new material, let me just assign a AI flat surface. And then let me just change the color. So that's a problem. Looks like I need to render everything again. So see, guys, GPU doesn't work for the flat surface, so I'll just use CPU. Okay, there you go. Okay, so as I mentioned, right? So it's a weird shader. It's just a flat shader, and the reason I'm using it is because again, I don't want you to get confused with all the other parameters like transparency or maybe specularity and all of that stuff. We can just focus in on the ambient occlusion. Okay, so almost any renderer will have this, right? Or any 3D application. So what I'll do, everyone, is I'm going to assign an ambient occlusion on the color. So it's going to use that ambient occlusion. And we did a little bit of that already. And let's just admit a few more people in. So maybe something. Okay, so what I'll do is, as I mentioned, I'm assigning an ambient occlusion shader, right? So maybe I'll look for ambient occlusion. Arnold has one. I think it's under shader. And notice that you do have ambient occlusion there. So see? So I can plug that in. And notice what happens, everyone. We have that ambient occlusion. In fact, let me assign that to everything, right? Including this object. Okay, and then ambient occlusion. Okay, so there you go. So notice what happens is extremely fast. It simulates, even if I remove, I think, the light, it will still work. So see, even if I remove the light, I deleted it, it will still work. Okay, and this is a nice shader because what it does, right, it simulates ambient lighting. So notice that it has lighting all the way through, and areas that are, contact areas are darker. So notice that areas where it's in contact with other objects becomes darker. It simulates natural soft shadows, right? And you already know this, okay? Now, the great thing about this is you can expand this, okay? Meaning, let's have a look. You can play around with it. You can experiment with it. What do I mean by that? If you have a look at the ambient occlusion shader, notice that you can play around with spread. So see, notice now that you have that particular effect. Okay, so you can also play around with things like fall off. Let's say change the fall off to, let's say, 0.1, and notice that you're able to change the fall off. Okay, so for example, if you're dealing or creating something like that really dark effect of, of something like this, it's a really useful shader, or a really useful effect that you can manipulate. So say, for example, something like that. If you want those really dark shadows and dark contact areas, using that ambient occlusion can work to your advantage, right? So notice now that I have something like that. Okay. Now, on top of that, let me just show you that you have the ability to change the how it's rendered. So just an example, right? Instead of white, let me just change that to, let's say, the white areas. I want that to be perhaps orange. Okay, so notice what happens. Now it's actually orange. Okay, and maybe for the dark areas, I want that to be dark orange. Right, so maybe, I don't know, maybe something like red. Okay, and notice that I am able to create that effect as well. Okay, so really useful perhaps in certain situations, right? Where you're able to, if you need that particular effect. Another reason why this might be important is because you can assign not the color, you can actually assign the texture. So let me just show you what I mean. So I'll just undo that. Okay. So basically what you're able to do, and let me just, I guess, increase this a little bit. And let's just change the fall off. So maybe something like that. Okay. There you go. So again, notice that we have our white areas there quite visible, and we have dark areas there. And again, I played around with, let's say, things like spread and things like fall off, right? Now, what I'm able to do is in the white areas, let's say I want to put something there that's highly stylized, right? What I can do, instead of using a color, I can actually assign a texture. Now, you can use pretty much any texture here, but notice that there's also Arnold textures, and these are procedural textures, okay? So what do I mean by that? If I, for example, go to, let's say, noise, notice what happens. It provides noise, but only on the areas where it's white. So for example, I can play around with things like the amplitude of that noise. Oops. We also, sorry guys, we also assigned, just remember, we also assigned it to the ground, right? So if you don't want it assigned to the ground, let me just assign something else to the ground so you won't get confused. I'll just go and assign a standard surface, and then there you go. And maybe for that standard surface, I have something like, and maybe let's just create a light again. So we have something there to light it. Okay, so there you go. So see, notice what happens there. I'm basically assigning a noise pattern on just the areas where we have ambient lighting. Okay, so again, it really doesn't matter. It looks like we're texturing it, but we're not really. So notice that even if you move the camera, see, you have something like that. Okay, now if the object is animated, notice that, see, if the object is animated, you get something like this. Okay, see, so again, it's not, you might think it's texturing, but it actually adjusts itself based off the lighting and also based off where your objects are positioned. Okay, so if I, for example, move this object, notice that, see, these areas now are also a little bit whiter, or has that noise because it doesn't have a lot of occlusion anymore. But notice that this area is very dark. It doesn't have any of that noise because, again, you have the occlusion there. But see, this one doesn't. So notice now we have that effect. Okay, so might be useful in certain instances, right? So for example, if I change it, instead of using, let's say, an AI flat surface, and let's say I'll change it to something else. So in Arnold, you have a lot of possible noises there that you can play around with. So let's say I'll use this cellular noise. Okay. Notice that with that cellular noise, I can change it to, let's say, a whirly pattern. See, notice now that it's giving me that whirly pattern there. Okay. And it's basically only giving you that pattern. And let me just go back. Okay. Remember? Oops, I'll undo that, guys. Sorry. So I think I removed it. There you go. Okay, so instead of using that noise that we did, I'll just change that and use, let's say, another noise. Okay, so maybe cellular noise. See, notice what happens with that cellular noise. I now have that particular effect there on the top. And I can change that to, let's say, whirly. And now I have a totally different noise. Okay, and again, you only get the noise where you have that ambient occlusion, right? So we're only getting the noise where you have that ambient lighting, because again, everything is still controlled by this ambient lighting. So see, I can modify the spread and maybe zero out the fall off. So see, guys, it's only occurring there. And then I can just modify the spread a little bit. Okay. So it's not giving you any of that here, but it is giving you something there on the top. Okay. So it might be useful in certain situations, right? Where you just want, for example, the speckle to happen at, let's say, a particular area where everything has, ambient lighting. Okay. Sounds trivial at this stage, but I'm just showing you that it might be a useful thing, moving forwards, right? So let's have a look at, other things we can do. But is this clear, again, with regards to what ambient occlusion does? Just checking if it's relatively clear. Again, there's a lot of applications for that. I already showed you that you can use ambient occlusion to multiply and create some really nice soft shadows or contact shadows for any type of render. But you can actually enhance that and modify that manually as well. Okay, so you can use that as a texture. So what do I mean by that? Okay, so let's just look at some possible, uses for that. Okay. So a possible use for that, everyone, is, let's see, maybe I'll assign, okay. So maybe I'll assign a new material to perhaps our objects. And maybe this time I'll assign a material that you're familiar with, the AI standard surface, right? And for that AI standard surface, maybe instead of using, let's say, color, okay? And let's just zero out the roughness or make it rough. And let's see what it looks like rendered. Okay, so let's just run it through. Okay. Okay, so that's what it looks like. Okay. So notice that, yes, you can do that particular, again, this is not ambient occlusion, right? It's basically just us assigning a material, an AI standard surface material to it, and it's just rendering it, and you're just getting that particular look. Okay. And then I can make it glossy if I want to, or I can make it, matte if I want to as well. Okay. So what this means is you can actually use the ambient occlusion in any scenario, okay? So for example, you can use the ambient occlusion for specularity, or you can just plug it into your color. So just to show you guys, see, I can plug that in, I can look for Arnold, and I can use, let's say, AI ambient occlusion. So let's look for ambient occlusion. So if you can't find it here, you can just type in ambient occlusion, and then there you go. Okay, so notice that instead of using a simple color, I actually used ambient occlusion, right, for my color. Now what this means is perhaps I can play around with the color here. So maybe I'll have that start off as, I guess, light blue. Okay, and then maybe it trails off to something dark. Okay, so basically what's happening, and I'll just show you, in my material, right? Instead of just using a simple color, I use an ambient occlusion shader. And then with that ambient occlusion, I can play around with, like, say, things like spread. So notice that I can change the spread, and I can also change things like fall off as well. So maybe instead of black, I'll have it, you know what, let's just have it go from really light blue to perhaps dark blue. So there you go. Okay. So notice now that I have, I guess, something like that. Okay. And on top of that, as I mentioned, you can even choose not to use white there. You can, for example, use, let's say, some sort of texture. Let's say I can just use a noise pattern. Okay, maybe a cellular noise. See? And now I guess I have, maybe I'll use a whirly too. And then maybe I'll play around with scale. Maybe 5, 5, 5. And then again, it's just rendering. Okay. Okay. So again, what this means is it provides you with some flexibility with regards to, possible looks that you can use it for. And again, play around with or experiment with ambient occlusion and how it might be able to help you achieve certain looks. There's really a lot of applications there. I'm just showing you guys that one, but there's actually quite a lot that you can do with it. Okay, so um, I guess we can have a look at other things that might be useful. Okay, um, let's see. How about facing ratios as well? Okay, so we'll have a look at facing ratio and maybe curvature. Okay, but is ambient occlusion relatively clear for everyone in terms of what it's able to do? Okay, checking if there's any questions. No questions? Let me just share this scene. Sorry. So I did share my scene, everyone, so you can just have a look at that. Okay. Okay, let's have a look at other things that might be useful. Okay. So what I'll do, everyone, is again, I'll assign the same material. Okay. So I'll assign the same flat surface, right? And the reason why I'm using a flat surface is you can just see it uh, as a flat color. See? So I'll just render it out and then it's just giving you that flat color. Let's have a look at another useful material or another useful effect for you guys. Okay, so if I click on this, remember we can use ambient occlusion and it allows us to create some really interesting effects. But there's another one. If you look for facing ratio, okay, this particular, it's actually similar to what you have in Substance Painter, but I'll just show you what you get. Okay, so with facing ratio, everyone, and I think let's just see if this actually works. I think I'm using, let's just see if this actually works here. Maybe instead of using, let's check if I'm using CPU. There you go, geez. Sometimes it just takes time to update. Let's just check again. Again, I'm using a lot. I'm recording and at the same time we're using the camera and at the same time we're rendering, so it's just using a lot of resources. But anyway, this is your facing ratio, right? And notice that in your facing ratio, it's giving you, it's basically calculating similar to what you have in Substance. It's calculating faces that are facing directly to your camera and faces that are not, are looking away from your camera. So notice that you have black areas or black spots where it's not facing the camera, and the areas that are facing the camera are really bright. Okay, so what this means is notice that you have bias, okay, and you also have gain. Okay, so notice now, see, if I, for example, modify this, see, notice now that I'm able to achieve that particular effect. Okay, and the reason why that is happening is because, as I mentioned, the faces that are facing your camera will achieve a particular, color, right? Particularly white. And then you have, again, gain. You're just increasing or decreasing that effect. And now I get something like that. Okay? So this particular effect might be useful, especially when you want to come up with, some different types of effects, right? Similar to what we have here. Okay, so again, I can even invert it, everyone. So if I invert it, notice now that these areas, see, are black and those areas are bright. Okay. Now you can just imagine if I use something like screen or add, it will create that nice, probably some sort of nice sheen-like effect, or maybe that nice soft, surface effect, right? If you are using that particular, effect there. So see, I can adjust it, and now I'm able to achieve that. Okay. Okay, so with that said, again, that's facing ratio. So again, notice that it's basically just calculating faces that are facing your camera, and then faces that are facing away from your camera, and it creates, some sort of grayscale value out of that. Now, if you want to colorize it though, a bit trickier, because notice that again, everything's color. It's just black and white, or it's just giving a float value, right? So what you're able to do is you can actually colorize this, and this is where your knowledge of the hypershade will come in. So hopefully you've worked with a hypershade before, and what we just need to do is we just need to just grab the network of that shader or that material that we created. So I can do that by just selecting an object and then going to graph and graph material selected. So see? So basically I have this. So if you're into, for example, something like Houdini, it's just giving you a node graph of what's happening. So see guys, that our facing ratio there, the output of that is plugged into the color of our AI flat material. So remember this AI flat material, and the AI flat material is basically part of the shading group. The shading group is basically, your surface material, your displacement, and your volume if you have it. But again, it's just a group of shading parameters, right? You don't even have to worry about that too much. But again, from a logical perspective, that's just your facing ratio that we manipulated. It's just plugged to the color, and then it's plugged to the standard, the shading group. Okay, so if you want to colorize this, you can just treat it as data, right, or data. So what you're able to do is we can just maybe plug that. Okay, I'm looking for a special node. Again, I'm pressing tab, or you can just use the textures here, or maybe some of the utilities here. I'm looking for a special node under shader. I'm looking for perhaps ramp RGB. I think the ramp might work for this one, but let's have a look. Okay, I'll just go ramp RGB, and then maybe I'll just plug the AI's. Let's see what's connecting. Out transparency. Okay, so what I'll do is maybe I'll just plug in this one here, and then the out color, I'll plug it there. So what I'm doing is I'm using this AI ramp RGB to grab or to convert the AF facing ratio into actual colors. Okay, so how do I do this? In the AI ramp RGB, perhaps I'll just use custom because we are using the facing ratio. So I won't use the V or U parameters of my UVs. I'm using custom. Okay, so with that run, what I'll do is perhaps I'll change my ramp. Okay, so maybe I'll change it from, let's say, maybe yellow. And let's say the final color will be, I don't know, blue. Okay, so now I have something like that. Okay, so I'm basically just colorizing, right? What's happening on our facing ratio. Now I can change that to, let's say, linear, or if you want a cartoony effect, basically it's basically set to none. So now I can just set this to none as well. So it doesn't have any interpolation at all. So you're just basically getting something like that. So see, now you get a toon-like effect, primarily because, see, you're not getting any transition between the colors, right? You're just getting you're not getting any transition at all. Okay, so might be useful, right? In fact, the shading, the facing ratio is a common, sometimes you can see it, sometimes you can't. It's really a common thing in a lot of shading networks. Even if you can't see it, if you can't see the node yourself, it's embedded in the shader. They usually use quite a lot of that in different types of shader. Even in the AI standard surface, it's going to use a little bit of that facing ratio. Okay, so again, basically what's happening, right, is let's have a look. Okay, that object. Okay, I assigned an AI flat surface. And the reason why I'm assigning an AI flat surface is because, everyone, I'm using AI flat surface because I just want you to see the result without having a look at the specularity, transmission, all of that stuff. Just the resulting color. Okay, and that with that resulting with that color, I assigned a facing ratio, remember? And that allows us to calculate the areas facing the camera and away from the camera. And then we plug that into, let's say, this AI ramp RGB. So AIs, it's always Arnold, right? So if you're using RenderMan, use the RenderMan ones. If you're using Redshift, then Redshift would also have facing ratio as well. If you're using Blender, then it also uses Blender as well. Okay, depending on the renderer you're using. Okay, so now it's eventually I was able to capture, I guess, that particular look. Okay. Okay, is that clear? I guess. Ambient occlusion, facing ratio, are those two relatively clear for everyone here? Again, it's just a utility, right? It's a utility that you can use to play around with different types of effects. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. In fact, let me just even explore this a bit further. Let's see. I wonder if I can just add a texture. So let's see if we can add the texture. I want to add the texture to the blue. And maybe for this texture, you know what? Let's just have a look at this later on. But technically, you can still add the texture. Let me just add a cellular noise. And then let's render that one out. So see, you can technically add a cellular noise as well if you want. But we'll deal with that later on, guys. I just want to cover a few more, general um, shading tools that you can use. So the curvature is something similar, but it deals with the curvature of your surface. So basically, it's the normal, right? So the surface normals. So it's basically looking at what areas in your surface are curved, what areas are flat. And it gives appropriate values to those areas. And the best way to really see that is I'll just use it. Okay. So I'll just go to our shader here. Okay, this is AI flat. Now, instead of using the facing ratio, I'm going to go under Arnold. And this time, I'm going to look for curvature. Okay, AI curvature. And then let's have a look at what that looks like. Okay, Arnold view. Okay, so hopefully this renders updates. So currently, guys, it's set to convex. So again, I assigned a curvature there. It's currently set to convex. Let's have a look at changing it to concave. And then adjusting the the radius, and then perhaps the spread. Maybe let's bring it back to convex. Okay, so there you go. So see everyone, notice what's happening here. We are able to, again, maybe I'll modify the bias. It's really exploring it and playing around with it, really. Let me just adjust the radius. And maybe multiply. There you go. So it is eating some of my memory here. But see, guys, what it's doing, right? Areas that are curved. See? So those areas there. It's able to, put values in them. So areas that are curvy are white. Areas that are not, or in certain curvature. So if it's concave, it's giving you white. If it's convex, it's moving in, it's giving you black. Similar to that. Although you can easily just change that. So see, now I have that separate or reversed, right? So that's convex and then that's concave. Okay. So that might be useful for different types of effects. I understand that it might not be that useful yet, but there might be instances where it might come in really handy depending on the effect that you're going for. And maybe I'll just play around with the bias. Okay. Okay, so maybe something like that. Again, I can colorize that if I want, but I'll just leave it for later, okay? But all I'm saying really at this stage, right, is that you do have some useful tools that allow you to experiment and come up with different types of effects. We'll have a look at the applications of that later on in the process, but it's going to be really useful. In fact, the sheet and coat um, settings in your in your material is basically using those principles of ambient occlusion, facing ratio, and curvature. And I'll just show you what I mean, everyone. Okay? So I'll just assign a new material to this. Okay? And this time, this is probably what you're familiar with, the AI standard surface or any standard material in RenderMan or Arnold. Okay? So let me just show you. Let's just render this one out. And this time I can use my hardware renderer. So I'll just use GPU and I'll just render that one out. Okay? So hopefully that works. Looks like it isn't, but let's see. So update current scene. And let's just, again, it's not updating. Again, it's primarily because I'm just using too many stuff at the same time. So see, that works. And then if I just bring it back to GPU, that should work. So it's weird. Okay. Anyway, let me just change the color here. Okay. So let me just assign a texture. Okay. To this one. And maybe I'll just assign a file texture. And perhaps I'll just assign um, let me just set my project up. And then maybe this pumpkin texture. I'll just use one of those textures here, guys. Okay, so maybe something like that. Okay, and then hopefully I can just render it out. Again, for some reason, I think it's because I'm using multiple stuff. It doesn't update. So for whatever reason, I'm using CPU first, and then I'll just bring it back to GPU. And now it works. Okay. Okay. So with that said, okay, let's just have a look at sheen and coat because that's going to be useful. Okay. And what I'll do, everyone, I think I covered this last week. There's AOV, so you can just see what those individual components look like, right? So what I'll do is I'll just turn on, in my renderer, I'll just turn on perhaps diffuse, and I'll turn on specularity. So spec, I'll turn on sheen so you can see it. I'll turn on coat as well. And then I'll turn on let's see. I'll turn on specularity. There you go. And then RGB. Okay, so let's just render that one out again. Okay, so let's just render it out. Hopefully this works. I think I might have two render sessions going. So let me just save this, everyone. So let me just open Maya again because it's not really behaving properly. So let me just open Maya. So we'll have a look at sheen, and then we'll have a look at the toon shader, and then stylus texturing. Then let's try to use all of those to come up with some experiments, right? So let's just perhaps have a look at that scene again. For whatever reason, it wasn't cooperating. So let me just, there you go. So geez, okay. And then I'll just render that one out. I'll just use GPU, and hopefully this works. Unless I have a material there. It is standard surface, so that should be good. Okay. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. Jeez. Okay. Because this is a scene I use for experimenting, I'm actually using a contour filter. So contour filters doesn't work with We'll talk about counter filters later on, but that filter doesn't work with GPU. Okay, that's why it wasn't rendering. Okay, great. So anyway, I just have that material there, and let me just lower our specular so we don't have any specularity at all, or maybe just make it really low. Still have that specular though, so let me just update that. Is it still giving me the... Jeez. So let me just change this again, everyone. Okay, there you go. Okay, GPU. Okay, anyway, I'll just zero out the specular so we won't have a lot of specularity in it. Okay, so now I have something like that, right? Okay, so what I'll do is just to show you coat and sheen, because it's basically using the stuff we covered, right? Which is facing ratios and also curvature. So for example, if I turn on sheen, everyone, currently sheen is 0, okay? So if I increase that, notice what happens. I'm starting to get some sheen into my object there, okay? So if you have a look at sheen, okay, see, basically it actually is quite similar to what we had earlier, right? Which is, I think, the curvature, right? Notice now we are getting, white on areas that are, again, um, either convex or concave, okay? So notice that also we can play around with roughness, okay? So see, now I have something like that. It's actually quite similar to what we had earlier. Okay, so again, I'm just viewing the sheen itself. So this is the beauty pass, but now I'm viewing the sheen. Okay, so this is important because, as again, if you're planning to use, let's say, the AI standard surface, totally fine. You can render it as a pass, and then you can play around with it and come up with different types of looks, similar to what we did last week, right? The only issue you have with this one is, see, notice that the sheen doesn't go beyond 1. Okay, and sometimes when you're doing stylized stuff, you really want something, if you want more sheen than that, that might be an issue, right? Or if you want to control the sheen, maybe let's say change the color. So yes, you can change the color to, let's say, something like blue, okay, and that works, okay? But if you want to control it even further, then it might be difficult to do. But it's still doable, right? You can still do it this way, okay? So for example, I have something like that, and now, or maybe I'll make that a little bit brown, okay? So there you go. But our issue is, and basically what I'm saying, right? Our issue is I can't change it beyond 1. So if I change it to 10, see, it goes back to 1. And I'm only getting that particular look. And sometimes you just want more. I understand you can do that in compositing and you can just adjust it and make it brighter in compositing. Another option you might have is you can increase the, I guess, if you increase the value here, it will be tricky. I'll just show you. If you increase it to, let's say, 5, see, it changes the color. Okay? So that's the only issue I have if you use this particular method, right? You might need to go to compositing to really adjust it properly. Okay, but it's quite useful as well. So okay, notice now that with sheen, oops, I'll just select that. So with sheen, I guess, there you go. So I have something like that. The only issue is you can't go beyond 1 here. Okay, but a lot of things they can do though. Okay, so for example, you want to break up some of that stuff. This is where your knowledge of noise will come in. Okay, so I can just click on this. So let's just bring it back to white. Okay, so there you go. Okay, and maybe I'll just modify the roughness a little bit. Okay, so what if you want to break it up? Let's say you want some sort of stylized painted look. So instead of using, let's say, color, maybe assign some sort of texture there. Under Arnold, you can use, for example, something like, I don't know, cellular noise, right? So notice what cellular noise does. It allows you to come up with some variations on the sheen that you have, right? So if I, for example, change this to, let's say, I don't know, cell 1, see, now I have something like that. And then I can play around with, let's say, amplitude or maybe scale. So maybe I'll change it to 20, 20, and 20, or maybe 25, and let's say 3. See, and notice now that I'm able to create that. Okay. So good question from Benjamin. can we colorize that though? Okay, so I like that. See, notice that it gives you the chalk effect. Okay. Um, and I can use that as a pass perhaps, or I can even use that as my actual, render, right? But again, this is where experimentation will come in. So good question from Benjamin. How can we, for example, add color there? So this is where your knowledge of the hypershade will come in really handy. So I'll just go to our hypershade and let's have a look at that particular material, right? So I'll select that object and I'll just graph that material in. So I selected the object, graphed this material into that selected, of that selected object. Uh, Everyone, I didn't do it one step at a time, primarily because I'm assuming that you already know how to use the hypershade because this is level 300, right? So this is not a basic subject where I'm going to open hypershade. I'm going to tell you what this area is and what this area is. This under the assumption that you've already done some of this already in the past. Okay. Now, again, notice now if you need help though with the basics and you don't know the basics of the hypershade, then I can send you some links. But for now, I'm assuming that you guys are comfortable using the hypershade. But again, what's happening is, see, we have the albedo there, right? And it's connected to our color. That's the texture. Our cellular noise is connected to the sheen color. The problem is the cellular noise is black and white. It's just giving you, float data, right? Now, you can colorize that, right? So what I can do is maybe I'll just use, let's try the AI ramp again. Okay, ramp RGB. So again, it's out color. This might be tricky because the out color is RGB. Let's see if this actually works. Can I just plug that into inputs? See, that's the problem, everyone. I can't plug that into inputs. Okay, so let's look for something else. Maybe instead of using, because if it's black and white, that means, or grayscale, that means the red, green, and blue channels are basically the same. If you don't believe me, I'll show you the render. Okay, so if you have black and white, basically your red channel, your green channel, see, and your blue channel is identical. Okay, so what this means is I can just grab one of those channels then. Let's see if that works. Okay, so maybe I'll just grab the red, plug that in, and then for the out color, I'll just plug that directly to the sheen. Okay, so let's see what we can do with this one. Okay, notice guys that again, the type is V, but let's just customize that. Okay, so with that customized, let's have a look at perhaps changing it to green. So see, notice that I was able to change it to green. You know what? Probably need that to be dark green. And maybe for the white, I might change that to, I don't know, light green. See? So notice now that I was able to change that, right? So again, some useful tools. The only issue I have, again, everyone, is, see, if I want it brighter, I need to do it in compositing now instead of doing it here. Okay, so basically, I'll just show you again. So beauty, that's diffuse, and we'll have a look at that later on. And then maybe let's have a look at, specular, and that's our sheen. Okay. So is sheen relatively clear for everyone what it does? It might allow you some really interesting effects. Let's have a look at what the render actually looks like. I haven't seen it. Okay. So see, that's my problem there. It's not really giving you a clear result. Maybe let's play around with, I guess, the sheen itself, everyone. So see, it's already at 1. There you go. And maybe for the roughness. So see, so it does give me a little bit of that here. I might increase the number of samples that we're getting. So I'll just go up to 10. And you know what? Let me just zero out. It's usually the specular that's annoying. So see, now I guess I have something like that. Okay. So notice now that I'm able to create that type of effect. Okay. Now, what I mean, right, is we have our beauty and we have our sheen. Okay. And maybe let me just adjust the sheen. Okay. So what I'm saying, everyone, is, you know what? Before we put that in compositing, let's just have a look at coat. Okay. So let's have a look at coat. So we have sheen and we have coat. Okay. So let's have a look at what coat looks like. Currently, it's black. We're not getting anything. Let's increase the coat. And coat actually looks familiar as well. Okay, it still looks like, I think sheen might look something like facing ratio. And then this one looks more like a combination of a little bit of specularity and also curvature. But let's see what it looks like if we just play around with some of the settings there. Okay, so anisotropy. It's more of a coat-like effect, really. So I can't even modify it too much. Okay, and it's also giving me color, but that should be okay. Rotation. There you go. So as I mentioned, everyone, you can still. So let me just show you what it looks like though with your beauty though. Okay, notice that that coat allows you to just add some coating on top of your object. So see, so that's without any coating, and then that's with coating. Okay, so it's a little bit of specularity, but also it's almost like you're coating your objects there. And then you do have roughness as well. Okay, and I guess if I zero it out, that's what you get. So it might not be, again, it can be useful, for example, if you want certain types of effects, right? So for example, if you just want, let's say, under your coat, if I just activate that, right? And let's have a look at coat. And maybe I'll just increase roughness. Okay. So again, similar stuff. If I go here, maybe add some sort of texture. So let's look for texture and let's add, I don't know, let's try the flakes, or you know what, let me just use noise, the regular noise, and let's see if that actually works. 20, 20, 20. This one doesn't really give us much, but let me just, I guess, break connection. And let me just try using, I think the coat is really just black and white. So it's not, so if let's try changing the color. So see, even if I change the color, looks like it's not really allowing me to change it too much. It's just a little bit of subtlety there. But the coating itself looks like it's always going to be white. But that's fine, okay? Might be useful in certain instances, right? Okay, so what I'll do is maybe I'll zero out coat and maybe just concentrate on our sheen, okay? So I'll just turn off our render pass for sheen, guys. Sorry, for coat. And then even specular. There you go. So that's our diffuse and that's our sheen there. Okay. And then maybe what I'll do is I'll just hide this temporarily. Okay, there you go. So as I mentioned, right, with sheen, the only issue you have is if you want it to be more pronounced, you might need to just do it in compositing. Meaning I'll go to and save this. Okay, I'll save this, let's say here, under my tests. And then I'll just go here and plug it to sheen test. Okay, and then I'll open After Effects. And let's see what that looks like. Okay. So we're kind of running out of time, but let me just sheen and let me just do that as well. Okay. So again, guys, remember project, you change it under color. Make sure you're using OSIO color manage and then just use the CG one and then 32 bits. And then I think that's it. And then hit OK. And then what you need to do for this one is remember our effect. So for this layer, I just want the diffuse. So under 3D channels, I'll go to extractor, and then let's just have that as diffuse. So see, that's your diffuse pass. And then for the sheen, similar stuff. I'll just copy that extractor, but this time I'll grab the sheen. Okay, and now maybe for the sheen, I'll just use a classic add. Okay, notice now that we are adding that in. You're getting the same render, but what you can do is now you can color correct it. So let's go levels, and maybe let's try to increase that. So there you go. So see, so notice now that it was hard to do it in Maya because we're limited to you know, the settings for our AI standard surface. But if you do it as a pass, notice now that I have that as a separate element now. In fact, I can even do this. Maybe I can just add that as well, or maybe screen that. Okay. And then maybe I can even duplicate this like a couple of times. So see, now I have something like that. Okay. So again, the issue is I might end up, if it's too subtle in my render, I might end up just separating it and then do my actual, you know, adjustment inside, let's say something like After Effects, okay, or Nuke. Okay, so is that relatively clear with regards to what sheen and coat does? Coat might be useful in certain instances, but again, um, I might even prefer something like facing ratio for something like that, right? And we'll cover that in a sec. But is that relatively clear in terms of uh, what those two things or what those additional nodes allow you to do? So just checking with everyone here. Any questions before we have a look at um, toon shaders or perhaps stylized effects? So relatively clear. Okay. So let's have a look at some other thing. Okay. So let's see. Okay, so toon shaders, because the toon shader really uses all of those things that I mentioned. Okay, so it's a really useful tool. It's not necessarily just for toon shading, although it's useful for toony types of effects, but it's also useful when you want those particular types of control, right? With regards to using facing ratio, using curvature, and stuff like that, and ambient occlusion. So let me just show you what I mean by that, everyone. Okay, so I'll just assign a material, and let's have a look at the toon shader. Okay, assign new material, and maybe I'll just go Arnold, and I'll just assign a toon shader. Okay, and let's have a look. Okay, first up, the reason why the toon shader is quite important for stylized stuff, and a lot of you know, look development artists use it, is because it has a special control, and that control is the ability to render edges and contours. So again, the AI toon allows you to render contours, okay? And it also allows you to render edges, similar to what you see here, okay? So the only issue is this works only with CPU rendering, meaning if you're using Arnold, just make sure that you're using CPU, right? Don't use GPU. Another problem, not really problem, but another limitation is for the edges to work. And let me just show you. I already assigned something there, right? And let's just perhaps change the color for this. So let me just change that to, let's say, something like orange. And then let me just render this one out. So I did everything correctly. I used the CPU renderer. And let's see what that looks like. So see, I use the CPU renderer, but I'm not getting any of those lines, everyone. Okay? And the reason why you're not getting any lines is because, or contours, is because you just need to do one other thing. And that is to go under your Arnold render and then change the filter type. So for Arnold to be able to calculate the contour lines and the edge lines, you have to use a particular filter. And that filter is contour. Okay? So notice what happens. Now we have that contour filter there, right? So it's giving you the contours. It's drawing a line around the silhouette and even around the edges or certain edges of your object there. Okay. Now, I was able to render that one out, but notice that you can definitely change the color. Okay, notice that you have edge color. And you can change that to, let's say, I don't know, blue. And now you have that as a blue edge color, right? And then on top of that, let's try modifying the scaling. So see, we can modify the scaling of that edges. Okay, there you go. And then I can modify the opacity of the edge as well. Okay. Now let's see if we can just change the color, the edge color here by assigning, let's say, a texture. So let's try assigning a cellular noise. Notice now that it does, actually, you know what? It actually works. Okay. So notice that it works, and let's see if we can just use a whirly pattern for that. And maybe let's adjust the things like scale. Let's try, I don't know, 20, and then 5, and then 10. Okay, and you know what? Let's just colorize that as well. So remember how to colorize that, everyone? Just go under Hypershade. We select the object, and we just go to Graph, Graph Materials on Object, right? And then remember, see, the edge color is connected to the cellular. So what I want to do perhaps is just use a ramp. Okay, so ramp RGB, and maybe just use one of the red, green, or blue channels there, and then plug that result there. Okay, and let's see if we can just modify it. Again, this one, the type, you have to set that to custom. And then afterwards, we can just perhaps play around with the color there. So that's blue, and maybe this one, let's just change that to, I don't know, green, for example. Okay, so notice now that we are able to change the contour there. Okay, so again, when you're dealing with contours, just make sure that filter is set to contour. Make sure that your system, your GPU, your CPU is doing the rendering. It doesn't work with GPUs. Okay, and then another thing is, if you select again the toon shader, right? Notice that it also has edge detection. Okay, and that might be useful for us. Okay, so let's have a look at edge detection. Okay, now for some reason it's not giving me, so it's giving you shading normals, but let's have a look at the renderer. Let's change it from shading normals to, let's say, geometric normals. Okay, and let's see if it's able to generate our lines. Or let's try smooth. Let's just render it out. Let's try silhouette. Let me just, no, silhouette, maybe this one. Okay, sorry guys. So let's try smooth normals and then modify the edge radius or the edge angle. Let's see if we're able to capture. There you go. So see, notice now that if we modify the edge angle a little bit, we're able to generate edge lines. See? So again, I can use, let's say, the shading normals. Notice now that I'm able to generate those lines there. Okay. Now the color is actually distracting for me. So let me just change that to black. And notice now that, see, we have something like that. Okay. So again, just by turning on the edge and making sure that you have the correct contour filter for that. Okay. Now you even have silhouette, and notice that with silhouette, I think we can't really see silhouette. There you go. It's basically the silhouetting around your object, right? So it's just around the object there. So you can turn that on if you want. And then you even have the ability to modify the base color and all of that stuff. Okay, so you can, it's basically similar to your material. So basically have your base color, have your specular color. You even have things like rim lighting. And then you have also things like, so just to show you, if I, for example, create a light, let's say an area light, so again, this is all exploration at this stage, so I'll just encourage you guys to explore. But basically, with stylized lighting or rim lighting, you can activate that. And notice that, see, you have that rim lighting there. Okay. And maybe, you know what, I don't think I need a light. So see, notice now that you have rim lighting. So you're getting that rim light. So what I can do with the rim lights, right? I can just separate that. So to have that as a render pass. So I'll just go to AOV. All the way down, there's something there called highlight and rim light. I'll perhaps activate that. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. So this is our rim light. See, notice now that I have that. And I have that sheen as well. No, I actually don't have a sheen. I have just the rim light. I have the beauty. And that's it. Okay, notice that I don't really have a highlight there. Okay, there you go. So you do have the ability to add your contour lines. And again, you can add a texture to those contour lines to create some really interesting effects. Okay. So just checking if that's relatively clear for everyone here. So you have a lot of tools you can play around with. Okay. With regards to, coming up with specialized looks. So just checking with if you have any questions at this stage. So relatively clear for everyone here. So let's have a look perhaps at one last, okay? And that's stylized texturing, okay? And we'll cover this more next week as well. But the idea behind this is you're not limited, okay? You're not limited to, let's say, just using Maya. You can use pretty much any application you want, okay? So just an example. So let me just create a new material for this one. And maybe I'll just assign a standard surface again. So standard surface and then matte, okay? And maybe for this one, everyone, I'll just assign a texture, okay? And remember, I can use, let's say, this pumpkin texture, okay? So now I have that, okay? So you don't have to do everything in 3D. So for example, if you want a stylized effect for, let's say, that particular texture, right? So it's something I downloaded. So it's a downloaded texture, or it can be something that you created in, let's say, Substance Painter or Designer. What you're able to do is you can just use, let's say, something like Photoshop or artificial intelligence or whatever tool you want. Okay? So I like this, but I want it more of a painterly feel. So what I'm thinking is rather than trying to do that in 3D, maybe I'll just stylize that using a texturing application or a 2D application. So for example, here, I'll just look for that texture. Okay? So it's this one, this albedo one. Okay? I'll open that. So this one, guys. Okay? So as I mentioned, you're not really locked to a particular look, right? So, or locked to a particular software. So maybe what I'll do is, you know what? That's the texture for the pumpkin. What I'll do is I'll just go under filters and maybe I'll just stylize that. And maybe I'll just use maybe oil paint. Now you can do this in Substance Painter or Substance Designer. I'll just use Photoshop for now. So oil paint. So see, notice now that I'm able to perhaps potentially achieve that particular effect. Maybe increase the scale and then maybe the detail as well. Okay, and maybe modify the lighting. Okay, so maybe something like that. Okay, and then I'll hit OK. So notice now that, see, it's now stylized, right? With regards to how it's painted or how it looks. So what I'll do is maybe I'll save that. Okay, and then I'll save that as a JPEG file. So I'll just flatten this first. Again, we're using Photoshop here, but you can use any software you want. So File, Save As. Okay, Save As, and maybe I'll just rename this a stylized one. So maybe JPEG, and this is stylized. Okay. And then what I'll do is maybe go back to Maya. Remember, this uses a more realistic texture. But what if I replace that with the one I stylized? And then maybe it's, not sure if I saved it here. So let's see if I can just look for it again. Hit OK. And then let's see. Stylized. There you go. Okay. So notice everyone, see, now I have that stylized look. Okay. Or at least stylized looking texture. Okay, so what I'll do is maybe I'll just see if I can just render it out, right? So I'll just render it out. And this is where experimentation will come in really handy, right? So I'll just go render that one out. And let's see if we create. And maybe for this one, I'll just use hardware rendering. So it's just faster because I'm not using contours yet. So I'll just use GPU rendering. Okay. Okay. So maybe I have something like this. See, it still looks a bit more realistic to me. So maybe I'll just zero out my specular and see if that works. So I'll just select that and then zero out my specular. And then let's render that one out again. Okay, sorry guys. Again, similar stuff, right? I totally forgot to turn off my contour. Okay, it doesn't work if you're using contour with GPU. So I'll just bring it back to Gaussian. And then let's render that one out again. Jeez. Okay, there you go. Okay. So what I'll do is, again, it's not like you're limited to that. So even if I zero out the specular, I still get a really, I guess, realistic looking type of render. So what I'm thinking, everyone, is maybe I'll just play around with how this looks like in my hypershade. Okay. So I'll just graph my materials there. Okay. So what I'm thinking is, see, I still want it to look soft. A lot of ways you can do this, but let's see what happens if I plug that into, let's say, my emission color. So I know it's not emissive, but I'll just plug it to my emission color. And let's see what happens if I perhaps start increasing my emission here. Okay, so notice what happens. If I start increasing my emission and use that emissive color, notice that I'm able to create some sort of effect, right? So at least, it's giving me that particular look. Or I can even adjust it. I can adjust it myself and maybe adjust, let's say, the exposure if I want to, but maybe it's, something like that, right? And let's have a look at perhaps maybe adding some sort of, let's say add some sort of sheen. Okay, so add that in. Notice now it's just giving me white. But instead of white, everyone, what if I also add, instead of using white, maybe I'll also add that stylized effect as my sheen color. Let's see what that looks like. Okay. So perhaps I'll temporarily hide this, I guess. So let's see what this looks like. So let me just close that. And let's select that again. So I think we used sheen. Again, this is where experimentation will come, right? So let's see what that looks like if I just play around with it. If it doesn't work, maybe I do need something else to plug that, to plug sheen into. There you go. So now I guess I have something like that. And then you can even try putting coat in, see if that works, or, depending on what you're trying to do. And then you can play around with other things as well. So again, it's just a level of experimentation that you want to have a look at, right? So explore, I guess, possible solutions to some of your look development problems. Okay, so we covered quite a few already. So we covered ambient occlusion, facing ratio. We probably just need a few more minutes, and then we'll have a look at our challenge, right? So we had a look at ambient occlusion, facing ratios, curvature, sheen, tune shading, stylized texturing as well. Okay, so let's have a look at how you can perhaps combine all of those to come up with some different looks. Okay, so let's have a look at um, our process. Okay, so the first thing, guys, is you have to be able to break down things, right? It won't work unless you're able to really emphasize what you're supposed to recreate or what you're supposed to achieve. Okay, so you have to be able to articulate what you need for that particular look. Now, the good thing for us is we already specified what we need, right? Remember our scope? We already know that we need a few things, right? We need that soft gradient look, and how perhaps to achieve that. We can use lighting, all of that stuff. We're also looking for that nice soft backlighting effect as well. And we're also looking for other things like that hand-painted style texture and then that pencil stroke. On top of that, we want a subtle and clear contour and then all of that other stuff. Okay? So you just need to think about how you can perhaps solve each one of those concerns. Let's have a look at something, I guess relatively straightforward. Let's say contours. Okay? So you probably want, for example, try solving the contours issue first. How can I add contours to my render? So this is where perhaps you might play around with things like the toon shader, or maybe you use other methods for that. But let's see. Okay, what if I use, let's say, something like the toon shader? Okay, so I'll just use this scene that I currently have. And what I'll do is maybe I'm happy with the scene. So maybe I like what I'm seeing there in terms of my render. Okay, so what I want to do is I just want to add or find a solution for my contours. Okay, so maybe what I'll do is for this one, I'm thinking I'll just go here. Okay, now the question for me is, do I want a new shader, or do I just want this existing shader and add contours there? I'm thinking, you know what? I prefer having this shader. What if I just want to create my toon shader, sorry, my contour lines as a pass or a separate AOV or a separate element? So let's see how that works. Okay. So what I'm saying, everyone, is I already like my render here. I just want to find ways to add toons to that. Okay, without changing the renderer or changing, let's say, the shader. So what I'm thinking is maybe I just need to add that in. Okay, so I'll just remove all of those other ones. Okay, so what I'm going to do is maybe add a custom AOV or a custom pass. Maybe I'll call this contour. Okay, or maybe, you know what, pencil contour or whatever. Okay, pencil lines. Okay, geez, I'll just hit create. Okay, so I'm going to render out the RGBA, which is our final render. And then on top of that, I'm going to try and create some contour lines. Okay, now for this one, what I'm thinking is perhaps for this particular pass, I'm going to select that. I'm going to assign a specific shader to that. Remember the shader that allows us to create those contour lines? It's called the AI Toon shader. So maybe I'll use the AI Toon shader for that. So I'll just look for shader, and then I'll just look for the AI Toon. Okay. Now take note, everyone, that our AI Toon shader requires, remember, it requires a particular filter. So notice that this RGBA is using our Gaussian filter, but this toon shader, as I mentioned, requires a contour shader. So what I'll do is under filters here, I'm going to change it to contour. And in fact, my renderer, I'll just change that to CPU. Okay. And let's see what this looks like. Okay. So I'm going to render this one out. Okay. And let's see again what this looks like. Again, it's experimentation at this stage. So I'll just render that one out. And this is my beauty pass, everyone. And let's have a look at what's happening with my pencil lines. So see, now I have pencil lines, and now I have my beauty pass as well. Okay. So what I'm essentially able to do is I'm able to separate my pencil lines and also my beauty. Let me just go back to my pencil lines, and let's just perhaps play around with the look. Okay. Remember, we assigned the material just for the pencil lines, and maybe what I'll do is I'll select that AOV node. Okay. So it's pencil lines. Remember, we use this AI Toon material assigned to it. So what I'll do is I'll play around with this because I still want those edges though. So what I'll do is maybe under angle threshold, I'll just lower that down, see what we come up with. Okay, so there you go. So see, I like that. Maybe I'll increase my thickness. Let's try 3. Okay. And you know what? Let's see if the silhouette looks good. I don't really need the silhouette. This actually works really well for me already. Okay. Okay, so I'm happy with that. Okay, so basically what I'm able to do is I'm able to render my beauty pass, but I have my pencil lines as separate elements. Now the thing is though, I'll check if I can just render just the lines. I don't want any of this, grayscale here. So let's see if we're able to do that. Let me have a look at alpha. You know what, guys? The alpha actually works. See, what alpha means is anything that's white is going to be opaque. Anything that's black is going to be transparent when I do compositing. So again, the alpha actually works. And the alpha means anything that's black is going to be opaque, transparent, and everything that's white is going to be opaque. Okay, so this actually works pretty well for me. Okay, so I'm actually ready to render this one out. So what I'll do is maybe, right, I'll go here. I just need to tell or make sure that I'm also rendering alpha. So our pencil lines is rendering alpha. Our RGBA is also rendering alpha. So that's good. So let's see what we can do if we just save this as a multi-XR image. And let's try compositing that in, let's say, After Effects. Okay, so I'll just go to my tests. And let's say lines. Okay, and then let's go to After Effects. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just explore, again, experimenting whether this particular solution works. And again, I'm not going to limit you to a specific solution. It's basically you guys finding solutions that work for your particular, look, right? So this is lines, okay? And as I mentioned, I'll just create a new project there. And again, let's just assume that I'm happy with that render, right? So what I'll do is I just want the extra lines there. So what I'm thinking is I'll just go and duplicate that. And then let's see if we can go under Effects, 3D Channel, and then Extractor. We just want the pencil lines, okay? Notice, guys, that it does have alpha there. So what I'll do is I'll just use alpha. It's using copy, but I'll just use alpha here. And let's see if that actually works. Okay. So let's say, for whatever reason, it's not using my alpha. Let's just have a look at the alpha channel for this. Again, it's just part of the experimentation process, right? So I can't grab the alpha, although even though I did get the alpha for that, I just need to make sure that I'm using the correct alpha for this. That's why I don't like After Effects for this level of compositing. It's annoying. You can technically add it, but at this stage, I don't really want to add it, or I don't want to multiply it because I'm also multiplying those white spots or those darker spots. I really just want the lines. I know I have alpha, but the problem, again, with After Effects, everyone, the problem is, see, I'm using the correct ones, but for whatever reason, I don't have the alpha copied there. In Nuke, I can easily just grab the alpha, but it's no big deal. That means I just need to experiment a bit more. Meaning here, guys, okay? I just want a clear, so I just want clear black and clear white. So what I might do is under perhaps our base color, okay? Maybe I'll just make emissions. There you go. So see, if I increase the emissions, what I'm getting is just pure black, and I remove all of those, subtle shading there. So that might work for me, right? So see, now I'm getting pure, just black and then white. If I use that, then I can just use a multiply, right? So again, it's just experimentation, right? So I can't get the alpha even though I know there's an alpha there, which is weird. So see, that's the alpha channel, guys. And I can't grab it for whatever reason. But you know why? I think I can't grab it because I'm just saving it here. If I just save it, if I just save it with, if I batch render it, I think it works. So don't even worry about it. If we render it properly, it will work. It's just how I saved it. But anyway, it's no big deal because I already have that. See? And I think I'll just save this multi-XR image again. And this will work, right? So if I just go under test, lines, I'll go back to After Effects. So see guys, see, this works. If I just multiply that, see, that'll work. Okay, so see, there you go. Okay. Now, if I need to adjust it, I can, right? So under FX, color correction, levels, and I can just modify that. Oops. And there you go. So you know what? That should be fine. Okay. I can actually use it as a map, but it's a bit more advanced. But see, guys, notice now that, see, that's mine, and then that's after. Okay. So I'm able to just add that effect. Okay. It would have been better if it's an actual alpha channel, but I'm actually happy with that. Okay. So let's have a look at something else, for example. Maybe I just want to add some sort of softness there, I guess. So again, this is where you just need to think about how you can add that softness. So I'm thinking I'll render that one out. Okay. So I want, if it's softness, I might end up modifying the material itself. So I'll just go to modify the material. I'm using coat, but you know what? I'm thinking I might be able to do this not with specular. Again, this is just experimentation for you guys at this stage, but I'll just show you, right? So if I'm doing this, I might end up, let's see if I can grab material on selected object. So see, that's my stylized look. Okay. And maybe for that stylized look, I want a softer effect there. So maybe what I'll do is, let's see if I can just use occlusion. Okay. An easy perhaps is using color correction. So I'll just use AI color correct as a way to color correct. So the colors before it actually goes to the base color. So I'm just color correcting the colors, right? And maybe what I'll do is I'll just adjust, let's say the exposure for that. So maybe the exposure, I'll adjust that. So I'm just adjusting the texture before it hits our object. So see guys, notice now that I have something, and maybe modify the contrast a little bit. Maybe shift the gamma a little bit because I just want that softer. And again, this is where you might want to play around with other things, or maybe you want to try it with an ambient occlusion. So what I'm saying, everyone, is, see, maybe I'll perhaps look for ambient occlusion, right? And with ambient occlusion, I'm thinking, you know what? I'll connect that to, let's say, the color here. And this is where experimentation will come in. And what I'll do is maybe again, this is our texture, right? So maybe what I'll do with the texture is I'll try adding or multiplying it. So multiply, AI multiply, although I do want, so AI multiply, plug that in, color, and then this one is my ambient occlusion. I'll plug that into input 2, and then the result of that, I'll plug that there. Okay, and let's see if that actually gives us something interesting. So see everyone, again, I might use ambient occlusion or I might try facing ratio. Either way, at this stage, you know what? Let me just try one last before we go. I'll just, instead of using ambient occlusion, let me just try facing ratio. So let's just graph the material on selected objects. Okay, so I did this one, right? So I did a multiply, but instead of doing that, instead of using the ambient occlusion, I just want a softer look. So let me just see if I can just do it with AI facing ratio. And then maybe I'll try and add. So maybe the out color for that, I'll add it to my AI facing ratio. You know what? Maybe I'll just go directly here. Base color. Maybe I'll do a ramp. So again, quick thing everyone, I'll just try doing this. And let's just see, again, it's all about experimentation at this stage, right? So maybe what I'll do is just use custom. Okay. And then remember with this, because I like that soft look, that's why I'm using that particular effect. So maybe with that ramp, what I can do is I'll adjust that with my facing ratio. Let's see if I invert it. Nope. So maybe something like that. So see, I like that. But instead of doing a simple color, I'll actually assign a texture to that. So maybe for this, I'll assign a texture. It's the stylized texture that we have. So again, I'm just saying that this is just experimentation, right? So there you go. And maybe with that increased exposure, so there you go. So maybe I'll adjust that. And then maybe for my facing ratio, so there you go. Okay. So see guys, notice now that I have that a different look now there. Okay. So I have that nice, I guess it's almost like, you know, contour, not really contour lines, but I have that nice, almost drawing pencil-like type of effect. And then on top of that, I do have pencil lines on top of that. Okay. So for example, if I just do a very quick save, and then I'll just overwrite what I have. So again, this is where it is really just experimentation at this stage, right? And then let's have a look at perhaps After Effects. So see guys, notice now that's what I come up with. Okay. Not a big fan of the multiply one. You know what? Darken might be better. There you go. Darken is better for this. But see, now I have, I guess, something like that. Right? Now, on top of that, you can just do other things like modify it or change the color for this. But see, guys, notice now that I have that. Okay? So it's a very stylized look. Okay, so I think that's it. Okay? What I do want you guys to do is obviously experiment. Okay? So for our week 6 challenge, what I want you guys to do is experiment. Okay? Capturing the shading or capturing our look. So I want you guys to play around with possible shading, rendering, lighting solutions that will allow us to solve our creative challenge for the look we are developing, right? So let me just share this and plug that into week 6. Okay. So again, experiment with regards to it. It can be a combination of compositing, lighting, shading, rendering. Okay, but I want you to experiment and see if you're able to come up with that look. Okay, now as a test object, my recommendation might be to just use, let's see. So my recommendation might be to just use one of your objects there in your scene. So let me just perhaps open this. So when you're testing it, right? When you're testing your solution, just use any object in your scene there. And I'll just, while you're doing that, let me just copy that into Teams. So again, this is going to be week. So week 6 challenge. There you go. So deadline, let's do next week. That's Wednesday, um, April 3. Okay, or April 2, sorry. Again, if you're late, you can still engage, right? April 2. So again, the challenge is to, again, experiment, right? Using compositing. It might be compositing, it might be just shading, it might be texturing, lighting, rendering. See if you can come up with the target look that we're aiming for. Okay, so just do it on a very simple object first, because you're experimenting. You're trying to find ways to capture that look using all of the skills that you have. Okay, so what this means is, for this one, maybe just use something there. Okay, now it doesn't have, the character will be tricky, but you know what, I'll probably just end up using, you know what, that is fine here. So see, the reason why this is fine is because it has enough contours, see, and it has enough shape there that allows you to create some, you know, you can play around with things like facing ratio, or it has enough geometry complexity to, you know, to be able to test different types of shaders. Okay, so you can use that, or you can use, you know, perhaps this if you want, or really the character I don't really recommend, primarily because it might be a bit tricky with the character. You want to do, you probably need more time to be able to do it for a character. But I don't also recommend hard things, because you don't really see contours and you don't really see the shapes properly. But you probably want to try it, you know, maybe the hair, maybe here, or even this object here. So that might be enough. Or, you know what, that actually looks okay as well. So see, you can use that as your testing object. Okay. So does that make sense for everyone here? Just checking if it's clear what you need to do for this challenge. Again, let's come up with a look, right? Let's see who's able to, again, come up with some interesting looks for your project. Okay, so again, have a look at the directions first. If you can't access it, let me know. I did share that file. But again, this is what we're aiming for, right? Again, we're not aiming for that specific project. I'm just telling you that I want, you know, certain things like backlighting, soft gradient 3D look, okay, because it's content for kids. And then on top of that, I want you to have hand painted style textures. So see how you can come up with those types of hand painted textures. What do you need to do to be able to create hand painted type things? Pencil strokes like those, just to add some personality into our renders. And lastly, I want you to have that subtle but clear uneven drawings, right? Do it for a simple object first. See if that, again, we're doing it for a simple object because you're experimenting. You're trying to find ways to be able to do it. And if you're able to do it on a small object, then you can do it for a bigger scale. Okay, so that's it. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording. If you need help with anything, just let me know. Stop recording, and I'll also stop that here.